Yeah, thanks very much. This is my first of three talks today, so I'm sort of talking all day really. But I'm really pleased to come and talk to you. I've been meaning to do it for ages, so thanks for having me. I put this long list of authors up here because all the stuff I'm going to talk about comes from working with so many other people. I'm just a little part of that really. And I'm going to talk about restoring farmland ponds, lessons from their ghostly and their ghastly past. I'm hopefully not going to scare you towards the end, but there is some chance I could start to scare you at the end. So I hope you've got a strong cup of tea. Right, okay. So the thing I'm going to really sort of get across to you is that farmland ponds are, I think, it's fair to say, the most neglected and probably the most important habitat in the British countryside. So I will sort of argue really that a pond in the middle of farmland is the most important place in that farmland. And of course, that's where you need conservation the most, is in the middle of agricultural fields. So when you see a pond like this, which is beautifully restored, this is where all the wildlife is. And when you're standing in the middle of a place like that, you get lost in it. It's so vibrant, it's so interesting. There are so many species, it's noisy with wildlife. You walk out of the pond and you don't hear that noise. So it's the most important places, but the most neglected. Okay, so a little bit about me. There's a picture of me when I was young lad, age 10. Picture of my dad, a little bit of context there. And I spent my childhood really mucking around in ponds, a bit like this. So I spent my whole childhood running around in the fields, going out in the morning, coming back late. And I spent a lot of time catching this little fish called the Crucian carp. And this little fish really connected me with the ponds. And I just, ever since then, have always loved ponds. So you might think, isn't it wonderful? All these lovely ponds, these lovely fish, it's all good. And here are all the ponds in Norfolk. I don't work much out of Norfolk, you've got to be a little bit sort of sensible. So, but hopefully I will be welcome in Herefordshire one day. Here are all the ponds in Norfolk, 22,000 farmland ponds in Norfolk. But the problem I'm going to talk about mainly today is that all those ponds that exist still look a bit like this. They are shrouded over with trees, especially willow, sometimes alder. They're full of dead wood. They're completely shaded over. And it's what I would call a mass terrestrialization. Over many years, they've been allowed to grow over, so that a lot of people, even sometimes farmers, driving around, they don't really sort of have any sense that these ponds are there. They're kind of lost and abandoned. And the problem with this is that ponds, when they're in this state, are very low diversity. They don't have many species in them. There's a few specialists, a few things there, but they're very low in species, and you're missing a lot of really important things. And local people have said that the pond started scrubbing over after the 1950s, 60s era. And I think it probably did happen then, and maybe even a lot earlier actually. We started to lose ponds to trees as they stopped being managed and stopped being used as part of farming activities, and stopped being fished by people like me. So yeah, the inspiration for the talk I'm going to do today is this wonderful man here. This is Richard Waddingham. He's a farmer. He sadly died a year or so ago. So I've basically been hanging on his every word really for about sort of 15 to 20 years. One day I met him and he said, would you like to come and see my 40 ponds, Carl? And I almost bit his hand off. I thought, yeah, I would like to come and see, and he showed me around his ponds on his farm. And it rekindled my lost love of ponds, I suppose, from childhood. And it just showed me the way, really. I thought, my goodness, it's the biggest missed opportunity. So here is Richard's farm. As part of his farm, there's 40 ponds on his farm, as I said, full of species, grey crested newt all over the place, lots and lots of, you know, invertebrates, incredible dragonfly fauna. I think there's about 22 species recorded on this farm. Absolutely amazing place. And the reason that they're so good, and I'll show you some pictures in a minute, is because on rotation, rather than letting the ponds grow over, Richard clears away the scrub. So he's removing trees and bushes, opening out the ponds, and you know, and sometimes taking a bit of mud out. And he's doing this to a few ponds each year, and that means that, you know, every year some ponds get done. Doesn't do all of his ponds, I should say. And what you end up with, if you do that, if you reinstall this kind of old management, is you end up with pond landscapes which look a bit like this. Every pond is different. So we can see a overgrown pond in the bottom right corner, and then the other ones are managed ponds at Richard's. Yeah, completely different, but lots of open ponds, lots of vegetation, lots of aquatic plants, lots of complex habitat in his ponds. And when you sample, as I said, they're so species rich. So we thought, this is fantastic. You know, we learned a lot from Richard's farm. And then we thought, well, we've now got to see if we can do this elsewhere. Richard's farm is just one farm. There's 22,000 ponds in Norfolk. We better get cracking. So we started at my dad's pond, Sayers Black Pit. I thought I'd better go and work there because imagine if the press got hold of it that we had an overgrown pond on my dad's farm, you know, and they found out and it was in the background, you know, sort of. So we thought we'd better do my dad's pond first. So there's my dad's pond before restoration. Here it is us removing some of the scrub. So your chainsaw, and actually you can do this much quicker with a digger, actually, digging it out after you put the chainsaw on, but we learned that later. But after about 2 or 3 days by hand, we pulled a lot of the scrub out of this pond. So then we dug the mud out, and the digger went in and dug a whole lot of the mud out, you know, nearly all of the mud actually, at least 80 or 90%, that then got spread on the field. So here we are in September 2011. It looks like a bomb site. I'm now going to take you exactly 1 year on, and you can make little cooing noises if you like when you see the next picture. There you go. Mm. That's one. Oh, thank you. I got a little coo. Thank you so much. I think that was David. Appreciated. That's 1 year on. We took a group of students here actually, and they couldn't tell we'd done anything. That's just 1 year on. It was full of aquatic plants and looking really good, and I was just absolutely thrilled. You know, this was the start really for us. By 2013, it was absolutely stuffed with aquatic plants, all sorts of different species. We recorded by that point 17 different species of dragonfly, which is, you know, what you could see on a nature reserve board really. All the different British amphibians you'd expect were breeding, and there were none beforehand. There were no dragonflies beforehand. Yeah, just hugely successful. So we thought, right, we're on to something here. Here we go, basically. So in 2014, we've done a few more. We got the same results, starting to see all this biodiversity return. We then set up the Norfolk Ponds project with the aim of delivering farmland pond restoration in Norfolk. So especially focusing on farmland, but you can see we're changing a bit now. And so far, since that time, we've restored about 250 ponds in Norfolk. So we've made a little bit of a dent in some of the ponds. But I can say that, you know, all those 250, we are getting absolutely fantastic results. This really does work. So I'll just show you the process now. So here's a overgrown pond full of trees. And just to say, we don't do all of these, we leave some of these because there are things that live in these places that are important and you don't find anywhere else. We leave some of them, but the key thing is we're missing all these open ponds. So here we go, we're going in. We then take out the scrub. This can be quite good fun actually. We get a lot of volunteers helping with this, and so you need a chainsaw for a big pond, a couple of people with chainsaws, and you know, openly communicating with people, pulling out all this scrub out the pond, and you can use the digger for the really big bits. You end up with huge piles of brash like this. And what we do is we let this rot down and drop down. That becomes wonderful, messy bramble dominated habitat, which is great for the birds. We don't have any bonfires because that's carbon going up. We want just to have benefit from what we do. And this is a great place for birds to nest. We end up with log piles for amphibians that we leave in and around the pond. So all of this wood that comes out of the pond is left near the pond and effectively just disappears after a few years, actually. You'd be surprised. So there's no need for this bonfire. We dig out the mud, and one key tip I want to get across for anyone doing pond restoration is go in hard. Do a lot of work when you dig out a pond. Dig out a lot of the mud, get down a good way, you know, really do this because it's a one-off chance to do it. And the harder you go in, the better the result. And that is consistently what we see. So you dig out your pond like this and then spread it over the field. Here it is, all spread out nice and thinly across the field. Takes a bit of a while to get it thin. And then you can plough that in, and that is really good organic matter for your field. So far all we've got is benefits. That piece of field is very, very nicely set up with all that organic matter back in the soil. So I'm just going to show you lots of before and afters. You can make cooing noises again if you want, David. Put your microphones
I'm ready.
You want to. But here a shooting close pond in 2014. And you can see there's the pond before restoration. Here's the pond during restoration, an enormous willow tree in the middle of this. So we're clearing out this pond. I'm now going to take you to this exact scene with a repeat photograph 2 years on from this restoration. You can see what you can see. And there were no water beforehand. Look at that. Oh, thank you, Fred. So that's good to see. It's an incredible transformation there, like a sort of aquatic rainforest, really.
No introductions at all there.
No introductions. And here's another one, Hayden Pond 102. You can see at the top, you know, the pond before restoration. After restoration, you can see we leave quite a lot of scrub around the edges. So we don't remove it all, remove some of it, but not all of it, especially leaving it on the north sides and the east sides. So there you can see before restoration, straight after restoration, then 2 years on, that exact scene. And we're talking not just a few plants present there, we're talking about spectacular diversity in these farmland ponds in the middle of agricultural fields. Okay, here's another one going through time. So you can see sometimes they look a little bit raw just after restoration. You look at C there, which is 1 year after restoration. And then you've got 2 years after restoration. It looks like, again, you can't see anything was done, the sort of flourishing ponds. Sometimes we get incredible results. If you like stoneworts, which some of you might do, they're very, very important plants for conservation, lots of rare ones. In this particular pond that we restored, we had 6 different species of stonewort, which would be enough in itself to designate the whole area as important for this group of plants. So yeah, flourishing plants and also quite a lot of rare and interesting species coming back. And one of the things that was said to us when we started doing this was that the plant, you'll get this limited sort of, you'll get this bit of a flourishing effect on the ponds, but then they'll degrade quite quickly with pollution and they won't be as good, you know, because they're in farmland. And of course, we've had to study our ponds quite a long time to get the answers to that, but that's not what we've seen. Just as at Richard's farm. As you can see here on the left-hand side, you've got there's some ponds before restoration and then after restoration compared to controls on the right. You can see that over time, we get, you know, increases in, if anything, we're getting increases in number of plant species present. So they just keep going on getting better in time. So I'm just going to show you some of this sort of longer term development now. So here's Coal Green Field Pond 4 in 2015, when we're doing the restoration. So you're opening up the first time there in probably 50, 60 years of growth all over it. So there it is on 2015. There it is in 2016. You can see a little bit raw, but the water's clear. The plant's starting to come back. That's pot of Megita natans, I'm sure you all know. 2016 there. Exactly the same scene in 2018. Now it's really flourishing. We've got ranunculus, different species of Potamogeton. So the edges still look a little bit bare. And so a lot of the diversity is actually in the pond rather than around the edges. But now if we go through time, we start to see the edges really start to grow in. So the edges now are growing in. We get extremely rich plant communities in the edges and actually lower diversity in the middle of the pond itself as certain things start to dominate. But the overall number of plants is climbing. And then we go in 2021, you can see it's starting to, again, get even more complex in the edges, but also I hope you can see now the scrub is coming back in. You can see that in the foreground there from this repeat photo. So this point, and this is what we did this year, actually just need to start taking out a little bit of this scrub regrowth. Takes you no more than an hour with some loppers and a little bit of work, and you then reset the pond, you stop it from growing over, because otherwise you start to lose the pond to succession. And you end up with these incredibly complex plant structures in the edges. And this is, this is brilliant for plants. We've got all sorts of plants there, some rare things, if you know your plants on there, one of the things you can see. And of course, this is great for other species. So we'll look at other things now. Dragonflies in particular are great, love all this. Here is a plot showing aquatic invertebrates, comparing overgrown terrestrialized ponds in the wider landscape with the restored ponds of Richard's Waddingham on his farm that I talked about earlier on the right. Look at the number of species as a comparison. It's enormously different, significantly higher number, and these are very high numbers of species as well if you're an invertebrate person. If you like your great crested newts, here's a pond landscape before and after restoration, and we're doing restoration at the landscape scale, of course. So there was the known sites in 2010, and then we did more. Every time we restored ponds, 2012, 2015, 2018, we get more and more great crested newt population. So it's good news for newts, if you like your newts. If you like your birds, here we've also got some benefits as well. So one of the things that Richard always told us, because Richard was a birder, was that the birds really flock to his pond sometimes, and he sees a lot of his birds on his farm around the pond. So we thought we'd better investigate that. If Richard says it, it's going to be true. So here is the pond. Here are some lovely birds flying around. I was actually standing there on this day. And when we were taking this, when I took this photograph, it's just after rain, there was a flock of about 30 mixed of swifts, house martins and swallows all coming in to this pond feeding. And there were all sorts of other birds flitting around. It was a frenzy of activity. I'm going to show you what it feels like when you're there. Are you ready for this?
Yeah. Wow.
So if you're really lucky and you happen to be there at the right moment, you can see when the birds come down to feed, you just see the importance of these ponds starkly in front of you. So we wanted to look at this, and we compared overgrown ponds with restored ponds in the landscape. We found that not only were there a lot more visits and a lot more bird activity around restored ponds, but also almost double the number of species we're visiting. We're up to 80 different species almost visiting these restored ponds, compared to sort of, in the sort of 40s for the overgrown ponds. So there's something about these restored ponds that are open with plants that make them much better for birds. And we're not just talking about wetland birds, we're talking about all the farmland birds, all the threatened things like skylark, yellowhammer, all the different finches, whitethroats, lesser whitethroat. I could go on and on. They're all flocking into these ponds for whatever reason. And we wanted to know what the reason, and we suspect it was basically to do with insects emerging from the ponds. So we set up emergence traps on some ponds that had been restored, and also on some overgrown ponds that were, you know, covered in trees, and looked at the emergence of insects. And you're a very unlucky insect if you end up in an emergence trap, really, aren't you? Just a little tiny square like that on the pond on the top right. Up you come, and that's it. We pickled you. So sorry about that. But they did tell us something very interesting, because look on the left-hand side at the number of emerging insects out of the restored ponds, and that's chironomids, non-biting midges, and especially mayflies. Compare that with the overgrown ponds, there's barely anything coming out of them. So a huge amount of insect activity hatching out of these ponds. And that's the reason. And I'm going to show you, if you look underwater in these ponds, you'll see where all this bird food is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Look at all of this insect life. And of course, a lot of that is emerging out and feeding. See lots of mayflies, damselflies, charophytes, ranunculus, possum-eater.
Wow.
Happy days. There you go.
Amazing.
So ponds are good for birds once you restore them. We want to look at other things. Are they any good for pollinators? Because one of the things you do when you remove the scrub, of course, is you also remove the shading from the margin of the pond as well, not just the pond itself. And what we noticed was, especially at Richard's, that his margins were covered in wildflowers. And when we actually compared overgrown ponds on the left with restored ponds on the right in this graph, see at least double the number of daytime pollinators were visiting these restored ponds. So these ponds are also of great benefit to pollinating insects. We found the same for bats, we've not unpublished, we're finding the same for mammals. Everything you look at benefits from having some of these restored ponds in the landscape. And we're not just talking little tiny benefits, we're talking about big, obvious changes in the landscape. And it's because you're getting things like this, you're getting at different times of the year, different things are flowering. So here we've got Unanthe aquatica, the fine-leaved water dropwort in a sort of white sea really around the edge. That's a pollinator moment, you know, if you ever did see one. Here we've got a margin, you know, covered in buttercups, bluebells, you know, it's like, you know, part of the remnant ancient woodland flora. It's been opened up to the light, you know, it's getting the light. And of course, when you restore a pond, you need to be careful that you don't cover these over with the mud. That's why it's important to get the mud away from the pond. And so you end up really with these margins around ponds. If you let them lift the scrub up around them, from around them, you know, they're very diverse, structurally complex, and that's great for birds and great for pollinators and great for all sorts of other things. So it's pond heaven. Hope you're all starting to see this. Other top tips when you're managing a pond is not to manicure it around the edges. Here's a pond that's just starting to scrub over a bit. So we just managed this pond this year, actually. It's my dad's pond, Sayers Black Pit again. Leave the edges messy, long grass, short grass, bramble, all that complex habitat next to a pond benefits the pond and benefits a whole lot of other species in the landscape. So I know some of you are interested in sediments at this meeting, so I thought I'd bring in some paleoecology. So just to kind of see how is what we're doing, you know, to the pond relevant to what's happened in the past. So we're now going to take you to the bottom mystery pit. No one knows why it's called the mystery pit. That is the mystery. So here is the mystery pit before and after restoration. We took a core from this pond before we restored it. And here is the pond, and it's from a paper you can all read called Once a Pond in Time. And you can see here that all sorts of things going on, but the thing I want you to focus on is woody remains. This is the combination of leaves and thorns and bits of stick all summed up, recorded in this sediment core in this 1 centimetre layers. And as you can see over time, we're seeing a really big increase in the amount of woody remains, particularly after the 1970s. Whereas you can see, you go back to the 1600s there, you see not really great evidence of it ever being as scrubbed over as in the current day. So this scrubbing over of ponds appears to be, from this pond at least, and from a few others we've done as well, quite a recent occurrence. You know, They've not scrubbed over in the past. How on earth can that be the case? You know, trees grow around ponds. They love wet places. Well, we think it's because of this. And if you look at the sediment in detail and look at some of the different remains, we've got Cretaceous remains, that's Hawthorn, Salix remains, you can see that you get quite a lot of remains sort of present, and then an arrow comes across, you know, which I'm showing you there. That's when those plants suddenly sort of die back or seem to disappear from the sediment record. So it looks like we might have evidence from the sediment core of past management events. You know, things are starting to scrub over and then someone comes in and manages it. And so all sorts of reasons there would have been for keeping ponds open. And maybe, you know, we can see this in the past going way back, and that was why the pond, you know, was probably really good in the past. You know, and that's how ponds have, you know, ponds kept open, and that's why we need to keep them open in the future. We can also look at the remains of different aquatic plants in these cores. So this is, we can see we've got seeds of pot-McGeeton natans, charophyte oospores, seeds of alisma, water plantain, all sorts of things there. One of the things we have realized really is that when you look at what ponds were like centuries ago, when we restore them, they become like they were. We're seeing the return of lots of these different plants of the past. So it really is quite a rare example of true restoration, where you're bringing back things that used to be present in the past. Right, I don't want to scare you, but anyway, hang on. Just going to turn the lights down a bit now, sorry. Hang on, let me draw the curtain a bit. I'm now going to talk to you about ghost ponds. What is a ghost pond, you might say? Well, a ghost pond is a pond that's been lost. A pond that's been obliterated by human beings, buried, covered over, lost in time. And here we got, on the left-hand side there, a landscape in the early 1900s compared to the current day. Look at all those lost ponds. Those ponds are ghosts in the landscape. How do you find a ghost pond? Is there any evidence of a ghost pond? Well, if you look out in the fields, you'll see bare patches. You'll see black bits in the soil. You'll see crop marks. Maybe on a winter's day, you'll see a mist collecting in a hollow, an ethereal presence, the thin veil between past and present briefly lifted. Ghost ponds. Okay, so here is a ghost pond. So we've started to look at these. So on the top picture there, you can see a little pond that's circled. In the bottom picture there, you can also see a circle where the pond was. So it's been obliterated. You can also see a hedge in the top picture. So that hedge was obviously taken out and undoubtedly, and this is, you know, what we'll show you, was put into that pond. So you filled in your ponds with your hedges and your hedge banks. This is all part of that kind of real push for agricultural expansion after the 1950s. So here is a ghost pond, and you can see the only kind of evidence here in 2013 picture of it is a slight hollow in the field. You know, it's just that slight evidence. Maybe at night you'll sense something more, but in the daytime, just a slight sort of depression in the field. But nonetheless, that was where the ghost pond was. We managed to find 3 farmers that allowed us to dig these out to see if these ghost ponds could be not restored, but resurrected. Here we are digging down into the pond. And the first thing that's really good to see is you can see this black sediment layer in the bottom of the pond or under the field. That black sediment layer is a sign that we found the pond. That is the old pond preserved. So you can take samples from that, you can take cores from that, which is what we're doing here. You know, we found the old pond. So that's fantastic to see. One of the things you can do when you're restoring ghost ponds, a little top tip to the Herefordshire crowd is if you want to find the pond, and maybe for safety as well, digging across in the field. So go across one way, find the pond, then go across the other way and find the pond. and then you try and excavate that lost pond to exactly how it was from the photographs, from the pictures that you have, the images that you have on the maps, and from the on-the-ground evidence in the sediments. So here is that same pond we did in 2013. And that's Emily, who did her PhD on this, standing in the pond very proudly in a puddle. Doesn't it look great? It's like a bomb crater, isn't it? Notice that black stuff in the bottom there. 2014, 1 year on. Doesn't look spectacular, does it? But look at all those different aquatic plants in just 1 year. Potamogeton, Cara. And on the right-hand side of the picture, if you know your plants, you'll see that's the white flowering water crowfoot. Flowering in September, you might say. That's a bit weird. They usually flower in May, June, up until July. Something strange going on here, but absolutely full of plants. If we go forward to 2021, this is that very same pond. And I hope you'll agree, by this point, it really does look like it's been there for years. We can see it's now starting to scrub over, in fact, as well. So, yeah, these ponds can be very successfully resurrected just as exactly the same way as you would restore an old existing pond. The speed of the recovery is exactly the same rate, and the nature of the recovery is exactly the same. And that's because of this. It's because underneath that field, if you look at the top left picture there, we have all of this black stuff, and you can see it's full of snails there, which tells you that's a pond. But within that, it's full of seeds. And those seeds are still alive. So we found that in germination experiments in a greenhouse, that you could germinate, you could grow lots of these plants, basically, especially the Potamogetons, especially the Charophytes. And that was even after 150 years of burial underneath a farmer's field, you could still make these things grow. So this is a time capsule, an incredible store of life under a field. We don't know how long lived these things are, but I suspect it's not centuries, I suspect it's millennia. And then you start getting really interesting because you are bringing things back into the landscape that haven't been present in the landscape for a very, very long time. This is very promising stuff. So you can bring back not just common species with this method, but extremely rare species. So in Norfolk, we brought back a plant called grass polly, which hadn't been seen in the county for 100 years. And in Suffolk, across the border into Suffolk, the amazing discovery of slimy fruited stonewort that in a pond that had been restored that hadn't been seen in Britain, in the whole of Britain since the 1950s. Again, as the stirring up of these old seed banks is what gives you these rarities, and I can, lots more rarities are turning up as well. So this is very, very promising, very positive news in a sea of not so positive news. Here's another pond. This is a ghost pond 7 years on. Just look at the vibrancy of that, and that is done because of a seed bank. That's the only reason it can get like that. So it's incredible. Okay, so ghost ponds aren't zombies, okay? They're not zombies. They are fully functioning, vibrant, amazing places. I'm just going to turn the light on now. Hang on. I hope I didn't scare you there. Right, let's go on. So we've been, well, interested to see if you can apply this technique to really old ponds. This is where the link to your project is really clear, I guess, because we also in Norfolk have some very, very ancient ponds. And I believe the brilliant Tim Holt-Wilson has spoken to you about these. These are, well, pingos is the word we use to describe them, Ice Age depressions, little ponds, but what we're looking at here actually is lost pingos or ghost pingos. And you can see from these crop marks, this is a former pig farm on the edge of Thompson Common in Norfolk, that we've got evidence of old ponds in the landscape from the different vegetation. And if you look at the landscape and you put old mapping and also sort of LiDAR stuff and old aerial photography all together, all the little ponds with dotted lines around them that in this area are all lost ponds. They're all ponds that have been buried. So as you can see, there's huge potential here to resurrect these very, very old ponds, because there's just so many of them all in the same place. Your digger can just go along and bring these back. So we've just started to do this in association with Norfolk Wildlife Trust, to start to resurrect these ghost pingos. And we're in the learning phase at the moment. I can't tell you much other than we've started to do it. So here is a ghost pingo. You can see the different sorts of grasses there that symbolize where it is. Digger's now coming in to this spot where we're going to do the work. This is us doing the work, and that's Tim Holt Wilson in the middle of the trench there. And everyone's really, it's all really scratching heads. We're trying to work out what's going on with the sediments. Where was the old pond? How deep should we dig it? What archaeology have we got? All the same problems, no doubt, and not problems, but interesting things really that you're finding in Herefordshire, I'm sure. And there is the pond, almost finished there. And we think that might be something like that pond was, but in this case we don't have really good mapping evidence. We're just going on the sediments, but anyway, something like this, and then we've got this pond, and that's now started to fill. So if you ask me to come and speak to you in a few years' time, I'll tell you how we got on, but I can't tell you at the minute. So I'm finishing now, but it's a rally call. A pond rally call. We must not neglect these farmland ponds. Ponds that were managed in the past, but this stopped. We need to put this management back. We need to start digging out ponds as opposed to filling them in. Ponds are a fantastic way of balancing intensive farming with nature conservation. There is no better way of doing it. And the other thing that I really want to get across is you can't create an old pond. These old seed banks are ancient, special, unique. You can't, by doing pond creation, create that. It's like an ancient woodland. So we have to have these old ponds and these old pond sediments at the centre of wetland and farmland conservation. So as Thomas Husser wrote in 1557, I'm sure you've all read the works of Thomas Husser, providing advice to fellow Suffolk farmers, such muddy deep ditches and pits in the field, that all a dry summer no water will yield. By saying and casting that mud upon heaps, commodities many the husbandman reaps. They were digging out these ponds way back. It's the appropriate thing to do for these old ponds. So there's some wise words from Thomas Husser there. Just a bit of a reminder for you all. I'm sure you've all read his work in detail. So could ponds be the new pop stars of wetland conservation? That's the question that I'm posing to you, really, in Herefordshire. I hope that you agree. And I want to dedicate this to the wonderful Richard Waddingham, because everything I've said today all comes from him. He taught me everything and told us everything, and everything he said was right. So thank you so much to Richard. And here's all the people involved with this project. I'm just a little tiny, minuscule bit of it. That's your lot. Thank you, Herefordshire.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Carl. That was amazing. I'm totally re-enthused about ponds again, and we really do need to get another project similar to yours to try and resurrect the thousands of ponds in Herefordshire, while being a bit careful. Beth will be listening here as a geologist, saying, actually, we've got to be a bit careful with the ones we excavate. But I got a few questions, but if there are people in the audience who have any questions, please do unmute yourself and talk to Carl if you've got any.
I say I really enjoyed that talk.
Thanks, Giles.
You can hear me okay? Good. I've got several questions probably. Can I ask about, in relation to the farmland, what sort of buffer zone do you have around these ponds?
Well, we try to get at least 10 meters really, but the bigger the better. What we do see is that as long as we don't have a strong feed from a pipe or from a ditch, As long as we've got mainly groundwater feed, these ponds are really good with a 10 metre or so buffer. But the bigger the buffer, the better. The wilder the land around the pond, the better. So it's really what we can get really, but always try and get 10 meters. Yeah.
Just go on.
Can I ask about the when you're digging out and so for the farmland, do I understand a lot of these were sort of mole pits?
Yeah, a lot of them were.
So when you dig that out, how far back do you go in terms of going back to that original sort of clay base, or leaving amount of sediments in the base?
Yeah, a really good question. Yeah, we basically go back until we start seeing the clay on the digger a little bit, and you don't want to remove all that mud because that's your seed bank, and so really cleaning it all out to absolute raw clay isn't quite right. But also you kind of want to make a big impact. You want to be seeing the clay exposed in a few places actually, and you want to be getting a lot of that mud out. So it's no good just taking a little bit off the top. You really want to be doing this. You've got a one-off chance to do it, because once you've removed the trees and you dug out the ponds, say you dug a bit of mud out and you want to go back and do it again, you won't be able to get at that mud ever again, because the trees aren't sucking out the water. The water levels won't drop as much in the autumn, and you'd never be able to get at it. You have to get it that first time around. So and the more you do, the better the pond is. But obviously, if it means you're digging down to 4 meters, then stop, because that's then making it too deep. But so there's a bit of common sense involved, but the general rule is go in hard, really. Go hard or go home. It's the phrase you could use. Yeah.
This slightly boring question, but have you any idea of the sort of average cost of doing a pond? Have you ever worked on that before?
Yeah, I mean, we cost it up really. I mean, I think a big pond will take you 2 days, and a little pond will take you 1 day, and a massive pond maybe 3 days. But 2 days is usually enough with a digger and a chainsaw operator, maybe someone else helping for restoring a pond. And you're talking, I suppose, between £1,000 and £2,000 or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, that would
depending on how long it takes. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm intrigued that so you managed to get three farmers to allow you to do go into the ghost pond restoration thing, because that's something we love to do more of in Herefordshire. And I mean, in terms of any idea of the reception one might get if one went to the farming community and said, is there anyone out there that would want a ghost pond resurrected?
Well, I think when we first did this, it did feel like we were asking for the impossible, really. But some people let us do it, and we were lucky enough to do it. But I get a feeling the landscape's changing now, just in the last year or so. So we now have more people asking us to do things than we can do. So I think the appetite is there to do it. If your ghost pond's on the edge of a field, then there's a scope to do it. Then it's not interfering with farming. Then if the field is coming out of production, is going into a meadow, that's another opportunity to do it. And sometimes someone just might think, I just want to put that pond back, even if it's in the middle of an arable field. So because I think it's a very small area, a little bit of inconvenience for the farmer, but it's wildlife. That's not an inconvenience, is it? It's just seeing it differently. So I think I think if you will get lots of opportunities, but you just got to push it.
I have a question, please, if I can. Is this recording going to be on YouTube?
Yes. Wait a few days, it should be up on the Herefordshire Wildlife Trust website. So if you go to if you Google Herefordshire Wildlife Trust Ice Age Ponds, you will get to a web page where this will be popped up there.
Okay, that's brilliant, because we have an old pond that's just under probably 1/3 of an acre, and it's very overgrown. It's on the edge of the field, and we're willing, but we need some guidance. So it would be nice to be able to get in touch. It's why I'm watching this morning. And the field is ancient farmland. It's not been cultivated in many years. and the pond has certainly been around since the Middle Ages at least. So it's something we want to do properly, and we're going to be looking at it later this year, perhaps next year.
Right. You're in Herefordshire?
Yes, quite close to Ledbury, between Ledbury and Hereford.
Right.
So I might email afterwards if that's all right, to see if we can make contact.
Absolutely, please do.
My advice there would be to, if it's a really old pond and a very old place, you do need to be careful.
Exactly.
Just have a survey done beforehand, just so you know how to go about doing it. Because one of the things we're really careful to do is not the digger route doesn't go over areas where there are ancient plants and ancient woodland vegetation, for example, or old plants, and we tend to leave those parts of the pond as they are. So you want to create an effect without damaging existing conservation interests, and just sometimes you've got to do it a bit carefully. And so that sounds like your situation might be one where the pond would hugely benefit from doing this, but just being a little bit careful how you do it. So you've got a great chance to look this spring, summer, and then do the work in the autumn.
I just think it's dangerous to do something without knowing what you're doing, because you can spoil things greatly.
It is, yeah, and we're really careful. Sometimes we'll have like a lovely patch of early purple orchid at the back of a pond. So we always have a good look before we do anything, and then we make a plan and we go in and do it. And I'm fairly sure by doing that we've never really damaged anything.
Yes, there are orchids here as well, so not quite by the pond, but they are in the area.
Exactly, that's just being careful. So because you just want to come out with this with benefit, don't you? You can see all that benefit I showed you, but you don't want to have damage something in the process. So obviously going in with a digger and a chainsaw is quite brutal, and you have to be brutal to get the effect. But yeah, but you can plan a way of doing it, And of course, these big machines, they're actually not that bad on the ground. Actually, they don't disturb it as much as you'd think. So careful planning, and you can get your great results. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed.
Look forward to hearing from you, Anne.
I will email you later on.
Okay, brilliant.
Don't waste time.
Carl, you had lots of really interesting data there, which kind of proved the point very nicely, that you manage a pond and it suddenly gets very good for biodiversity. And one of the things we're setting up at the moment is pond champions to continue the work of this project after this project is finished. Simple monitoring techniques of ponds that we've worked on is one of the things we very like to give people, a sort of a toolbox, if you like. Are there any simple things that people perhaps without the ability to do complicated or to have complicated equipment could do you think?
I think there's a real need for that to be established, actually, because there are standard techniques for experts, but there's less of a sort of really simple thing to engage people that would also be beneficial too, is what you want, isn't it?
Yeah.
Something that the farmer can do or the local people can do. So I think there's the Opal project, which produced some stuff on that. Yeah, Freshwater Habitats Trust would probably be good to find out what they've got on that. But I get the feeling that still sort of needs to be sorted out a bit, actually.
Yeah,
there might be something that if you were doing a new project, you actually have that as part of a project, and actually think, well, I'd love to help with that, and I'm sure others would too, because there are simple things you can do, like especially like looking at dragonflies, recording the number of plants, looking for certain species of plant, for example.
Indeed, yeah. Well, that's exactly. It's sort of like we call it citizen science, don't we? And it's just being able to go and do something relatively simple, but still meaningful, without having to have an in-depth knowledge of identifying dragonflies, for instance, which I'm sure some people here could do.
Earthwatch should also be worth looking at as well. What they've got, so it's Earthwatch, Freshwater Habitats Trust, and the Opal project as well. There's three sort of and I think everyone ought to get together and really you know, we've done some stuff like that as well and got some ideas, but there's nothing sort of formalized, I think. So
OPEL.
OPAL, yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. Marvelous. Okay.
Carl, am I able to ask you a question? I'm afraid I'm a bit of an intruder here. I'm actually from Worcestershire, not Herefordshire, so sorry about that.
It's terrible.
Terrible, I know.
Yeah.
I would very much like to be involved in the Ice Ponds project, but geographically, it's just not happening. So I'm hijacking a bit here. So apologies if I'm going a bit off subject.
No problem.
I'm involved in a fledgling project in Malvern, the Malvern Hills. And we are looking at lost pools. We're looking at places where spring water used to be accessible before the Victorians contained everything, bottled it, sold it, etc. There's an awful lot of water that has been lost to public and wildlife in this area. Sorry, my dog is trying to get involved in the conversation. I'm looking at sites like places that used to be wash pools, used to be places where people could bathe, but even places where people were baptized, christened, that sort of thing. Where there's nothing left now. There's nothing at all. People have diverted and contained the spring water that was there. Anything that you think I should think about, or resources I could look at?
That's fascinating. Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. You really got me that's a real head scratcher, really, in lots of ways. One thing I would say is that I think that history, that very old history of wetlands and ponds is really important, and I love the fact that you're interested in that, because that's partly why things are so important in the current day, isn't it? That, you know, that they can reconnect us with things that we used to do that were much better, much more spiritual, much more about being in touch with nature, and, like, you know, the fact that people used to wash in ponds, that people used to make tea from ponds, people used to probably all sorts of quite ancient spiritual practices happened around ponds, you know.
Absolutely.
People used to dig ponds in western Britain, were sort of revered in the local community. You know, there was the lord of the pond, the lady of the pond. People walk around with garlands, and you know, and because it was all linked to fertility of the land with the clay, and so yes, ancient springs. So what I would say is, what you're doing is, there's so little known about all this sort of stuff. You know, we tend to focus on the history of other things. So I'm fascinated in what you're doing. I think that's brilliant. Yeah, that's all I can really say.
It's fine.
What you're doing is brilliant. I can't necessarily tell you. I think what you're doing is so new that you're setting up something new, and I'd love to know more about it as you go along.
Well, I'd love to be in touch.
I'll tell you what we found out about the history of ponds. I mean, and there's a wonderful lady in Suffolk called Juliet Hawkins, who, if you contact me, I'll put you in touch with her. Just immense knowledge on ponds and the history. Immense knowledge. She would be really interesting to talk to. But yeah, I mean, uncovering all that history, and if you then turn it into conservation as well, is perfect project, I reckon.
There's sites all over the place where water has been lost from our landscape, and it should be there, and instead it's piped away, but it runs to waste. So it's not, though it's serving somebody's property, and our hope is to bring it back to where it should be naturally. So if I can contact you, that would be brilliant. Yeah,
and just to say one final point, I mean, just in a wildlife perspective, you know, ancient springs and wet places, you know, that have been drained, if they could be put back, you know, are going to be wildlife havens, really, because you're in the headwaters of rivers. And headwater areas would have been, you know, I think in the past, like really critical biodiversity patches, and working in headwaters is also the place you should work in conservation, because that is all cleaning the water downstream rather than the other way around. So yeah, God, that's brilliant. That's made my day, what you just said there. Thank you.
Brilliant. Can I seek you on Facebook or something? Or
you find me on a UCL. You just look at type in Carl Sayer UCL, and you'll get my email. So.
Lovely. Will do, Carl. Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
Also, and it might be worth the Herefordshire Wildlife, is that bits of the Malverns are in Herefordshire, I believe, or are all the relevant bits in
Grey areas, yeah.
I'd be very interested in looking at a project on that, because and you know, possibly working with Worcestershire Wildlife Trust. Have you talked to anybody there?
We're very fledgling at the moment. We're really just putting feelers out, starting to look at the way that we can approach this. So it's very new. The only approaches we tried to make a Malvern Hills Trust, who haven't even bothered to respond to emails. But
I think
I'll leave that there. So
yeah, have I been on touch in Facebook briefly?
yes, yeah,
yes, yeah,
because I desperately want to come and play with one of your ice ponds, but I've got too many projects on. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Anna.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Very enjoyable.
I'll ask another question. So, what sort of timescale do you tend to sort of work on it, in terms of, you know, from when you start to investigate a pond to actually going ahead with the physical restoration?
Yeah, quite quickly, really. I mean, you know, if the farmer's keen, we'll go and do surveys, especially in early summer. It's a good time to do it. June's a good time. Do some surveys and see what's at a pond, you know, because even the overgrown ones might have something interesting in and around them, and then you can do the work in, you know, best time to do the work is September, October. So it can be quite quick. You know, you can go from having a survey, knowing what's there, making a plan, and then doing it. I'm all for doing, really, as opposed to talking about it. You know, get on with it, because nature, you know, we haven't got time to waste, if we. So yeah.
Selena, I noticed you put in it'd be great to get a pond restoration manual could be prepared. I know that part of ours is we are writing some guidance for landowners, so that will be made available. I don't think it will be a detailed exactly how to, but I think there are intended to be some hints and tips to get you started. So hopefully you'll be able to see that, and we'll tell people about it. Yeah, there are someone's talking about an Ice Age lake suggested ponded on the east side of the Malvern Hills. It's yeah, as you corrected there, western side. That is true. I have seen some papers with evidence for this, but you are talking at the end of the last Ice Age. It's to do with the various depositional things. I'm not sure that it will be somewhere that will find any kind of evidence. But if you're interested, I have got the paper references. Thanks for pointing that out, Nick.
Actually, Carl, if you could unshare your screen. I'm getting unnerved by the guy from Kajagoogoo staring at me in the face all the time.
I do like the comparison with the various plants, though. I'm liking that. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I thoroughly enjoyed that. Fascinating. And nice to see some ponds. Ours are still at the very, very empty stage, very, very bomb craterish. They're just coming back. So it'll be nice to see what they look like in a couple of years.
Yeah.
I'll just say one thing. So you talked about guidance. With guidance for pond restoration, we're just nearly finished a sort of a manual on how you restore, resurrect, and create ponds with the Freshwater Habitats Trust. So we've done it with them. So we've done the restoration bit and they've done the creation bit. So that will be published in the next this year. So I'm hoping that, and that's got all the top tips, everything we've learned in it. So I'm hoping that will be useful to everybody. But then equally, you know, we're all still learning, and so I'd love to know what you find out in Herefordshire and Worcestershire.
Indeed. Well, that's brilliant. Well, if there's no more questions, I'd just like to say thank you so much, Carl, for sparing the time to come and talk to us. That's enthused everybody, I'm sure. And we hope we can stay in contact with projects in the future.